I am standing right here, and I will not be denied service. Your sign doesn't change my rights. You look me in the eye and tell me why you refuse to serve me. I have every right to be here. I am not leaving this store until you serve me. You cannot treat people this way. You have no right to treat me this way. I know my rights as a customer.
Read the sign, ma'am. I'm asking you to leave the premises now.
How dare you? I am a paying customer and you have no right to deny me service.
I have every right.
Now I suggest you leave the premises immediately. I insist that you serve me. I know my rights. Not in my establishment, you don't. Now get out of my store. This isn't the first time this has happened here. You cannot treat people this way. We reserve the right to refuse service. Now get out. Go on, May, you tell him. We aren't leaving.
We are here to stay until we are served.
I'm asking you to leave the premises now. I demand to be served like any other patron.
We reserve the right to refuse service. Now leave the premises.
The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, their sickly buzz punctuating the silence in the small store. Amelia stood at the counter, her hand resting on the worn countertop, the tips of her fingers barely touching the plastic edge. She had waited for 20 minutes, just like the sign said, but when she spoke, the cashier looked past her, eyes sliding over her as if she were a shadow. The young woman's expression was tight, guarded, but Amelia could see the dismissive flicker in her eyes. "I'm sorry. We don't serve your kind here," the cashier finally said, her voice soft but cold, as if she were reciting lines she had rehearsed. It wasn't the first time. Amelia had heard whispers of this store's reputation, but it had been different when she walked in. The door had chimed with an almost welcoming jingle, a promise of normalcy in an otherwise chaotic day. Her breath caught, her chest tightening as the words hung in the air. She looked around to someone to help, but the few patrons in the aisles looked away, pretending not to see, pretending not to hear. The silence was more deafening than any shouts. "Excuse me?" Amelia asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. "Did you just say what I think you said?" The cashier didn't answer. Instead, she pointed to the door. Amelia's heart raced, the world suddenly narrowing. Her throat tightened as she felt the cold, sharp sting of humiliation sink deep. Her feet moved, but the humiliation didn't let go. Amelia's feet tapped lightly against the cracked sidewalk as she made her way to the small, local grocery store tucked between a laundromat and a pharmacy. It was the sort of place she usually didn't think twice about, a quick stop to grab ingredients for dinner after a long day at the office. The evening light filtered through the trees, casting long shadows on the pavement, and a familiar jingle of the store's doorbell echoed in her ears as she pushed it open. Inside, the cool air felt like a welcome relief from the thick summer heat. She glanced around, noting the cluttered aisles of products stacked haphazardly on shelves. The store wasn't much. Old linoleum floors, dim lighting, and a slightly musty smell, but it had always been a quiet, unremarkable place. A small community hub for people in the neighborhood. Amelia had been in here a dozen times before. The people were always polite, if not friendly, and the service was just good enough to get by. Today, though, something felt off. Amelia walked past the rows of canned goods and fresh produce, her fingers brushing lightly against the cold metal shelves. She picked out a few items, a head of lettuce, some tomatoes, a loaf of bread, and made her way to the front to check out. At the counter, a young woman, probably in her early 20s, was organizing some receipts. She looked up when Amelia approached, her expression blank. Amelia smiled, as she always did, ready for the usual transaction. But the smile faltered when the cashier's eyes slid over her, just barely skimming her face before she went back to her task. "Hi," Amelia said, her voice sounding softer than usual. "Can I get these checked out?" The cashier's eyes darted up again, this time slower, colder. She didn't smile, didn't greet Amelia. Instead, she simply stared at her for a long moment, like she was inspecting a piece of trash. "We don't serve your kind here," the cashier said, the words casual, as though they were no different than any other transaction. Amelia blinked, sure she hadn't heard right. The noise of the store seemed to disappear. the air thickening as she felt every inch of her skin burn with disbelief. She glanced over her shoulder, expecting someone to laugh, to say it was a joke, but there was nothing, not even a cough. The other customers, a couple of old men in the aisles, were looking down, avoiding eye contact. "What?" Amelia asked, her voice low, but thick with confusion. "We don't serve black people," the cashier repeated, as if explaining something trivial. "You need to leave." The words felt like they were reaching out to slap her, to brand her in some way she didn't understand. She stood there for a moment, frozen in disbelief, her breath caught in her chest. She wanted to scream, to demand an apology, to make sense of this reality that seemed too cruel to be true. But no sound came. She forced herself to speak, her throat tight. "Excuse me? Did you really just say that?" But the cashier only tilted her head, offering no remorse. "Leave. Now." It was in that moment, standing in the fluorescent-lit store with her groceries untouched on the counter, that the weight of years of silent racism finally pressed down on her. It was so blatant, so unexpected, that Amelia felt as though the world around her had tilted sideways. Her heart was pounding in her chest, the blood rushing in her ears. She took a slow step back, her feet heavy. The other customers still avoided her gaze. The door stood open behind her, and she almost wished the world to swallow her whole, to erase the shame she felt. Amelia turned and walked out. The door jingled behind her as she stepped back into the street, the heat hitting her like a slap in the face. Her fingers clenched around the handles of her bag, but the world felt blurry. Every breath she took felt like it came through a fog. What had just happened? How could this be real? As she reached the corner of the street, her phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her back to reality. It was Jamila. She hesitated before answering, the weight of what had just transpired still heavy on her chest. "Hey, are you all right?" Jamila's voice sounded miles away, like it was coming from somewhere distant, from a place that wasn't her reality. Amelia didn't answer right away. She wasn't sure she could explain. She didn't know where to begin. "Amelia?" Jamila asked again, concern creeping into her voice. I think I just got kicked out of the store," Amelia said, her voice breaking in half as the weight of the words finally hit her. Jamila paused, then cursed under her breath. "What happened? Are you okay?" "I don't even know," Amelia replied, a lump forming in her throat. "She just said she wouldn't serve me because of the color of my skin." The silence between them was thick and uncomfortable, but Jamila didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Amelia's voice trembled as she spoke again. "I didn't know where to go. I don't even know what to do with this." There was a long pause on the line before Jamila spoke again, her voice quieter now. "Don't let them win. You can't let them get away with this. You need to tell someone. You have to fight back." Amelia looked at the store again from across the street, the windows dark, the door still ajar. The anger bubbled inside her chest, slow but steady. She would fight. She had to, but she wasn't sure yet how. Amelia sat at her kitchen table, a glass of wine in hand, staring at the untouched groceries that had followed her home. The lettuce was wilting, the tomatoes overripe, and the bread was beginning to stale. She hadn't bothered to unpack any of it. The reality of what had happened at the store still hung over her like a storm cloud, unshakable. As the night grew darker, her mind kept returning to that moment. The cashier's words had echoed in her mind ever since. "We don't serve your kind here." They weren't just cruel, they were calculated. It was as if those words had been said before, rehearsed over time, so nonchalantly that they had lost their weight. It made her stomach churn. Thinking about all the times she had walked into that store and hadn't even noticed the subtle stares, the cold dismissals. They'd never been this direct, but now she saw them clearly, like the dots finally connecting in a puzzle she hadn't known she was solving. Her phone buzzed on the table, snapping her from her thoughts. It was Jamila. "Are you all right?" Jamila's voice was steady, but it carried a weight of concern. Amelia sighed, staring down at her phone, debating whether or not to answer. "I don't even know how to explain this. It feels like it's just happening to me, like I'm the only one who sees it." "Amelia, it's not just you," Jamila replied firmly. This has been happening everywhere. Maybe it's been more subtle, but it's there. This is just the first time they've said it out loud. The first time it's so in your face. Amelia's fingers tighten around the glass, her knuckles going white. I've dealt with little things before, but this is different. This was public. I don't know how to move past it. Jamila's voice softened, her concern palpable. This is the thing. They want you to feel isolated. They want you to feel like it's just your problem, that you're the one being dramatic. But you're not. This is part of a pattern. Amelia, it's time people see it for what it is. Amelia leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for a moment. Jamila was right. She wasn't the first person to experience this kind of treatment, and she certainly wouldn't be the last. But this was the moment. This was her breaking point. She had been navigating small acts of racism her entire life. Those little cuts that seemed insignificant but accumulated over time. A microaggression from a co-worker, a dismissive glance from a neighbor, the subtle exclusion in a group setting. She'd learned to live with it, to turn a blind eye, to keep moving. But now it felt like the cracks had deepened, and she could no longer pretend they were just surface-level issues. I've heard things about that store, Jamila continued, her tone resolute. People have talked about it. That's not the first time someone's been turned away. I've heard complaints before, but no one has ever done anything about it. You should report it. People need to know what's going on there. Amelia let out a long breath, the tension in her chest creeping down into her stomach. She had thought about it, reporting it, going to the press, but the fear had stopped her every time. Fear of being disbelieved, fear of facing even more backlash, fear of being isolated even further. Do you really think it will do any good? Amelia asked, her voice barely a whisper. What if it just blows over? What if they ignore me? You can't think like that. Jamila responded firmly. This is how it stays hidden. This is how it stays silent. You have a chance to make it public, to make it count, and you'll have people behind you. Amelia was silent for a long moment, the weight of Jamila's words sinking in. I don't know if I'm ready to deal with the fallout, she said, finally. I don't know if I can handle it. You won't be alone, Jamila said softly. And even if it's hard, even if you face everything you're scared of, it'll be worth it. I promise. Amelia looked at the glass in her hand, the dim light reflecting off the dark red liquid. Her thoughts swirled, torn between the comfort of silence and the nagging call to action. She had stayed silent for too long, allowed herself to quietly navigate the world that refused to acknowledge her humanity, her existence. But it wasn't just about her. It was about the others who had walked into that store, been turned away, and said nothing. They didn't have to stay silent anymore. I'm going to do it, Amelia said, her voice gaining strength. I'll report it. I'll make sure people know what happened. Jamila's voice was warm with approval. That's the Amelia I know. Let's do this together. Amelia took a deep breath, setting her wine glass down with a quiet thud. She could feel the fire of determination burning in her chest, the anger slowly rising to meet her resolve. This wasn't just about one store. It was about a system that perpetuated injustice, that turned a blind eye to the very real, very painful consequences of racism. And she wasn't going to be silent anymore. The following morning, Amelia woke up early, her mind already racing. The conversation with Jamila had ignited something in her, a fire that refused to be ignored. She couldn't back down. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. She had to take the next step, expose a truth that had been swept under the rug for far too long. She dressed quickly, opting for a simple black dress and flats, something casual but confident. Her reflection in the mirror seemed unfamiliar. It wasn't the same woman who had walked into the store the day before, the one who had been caught off guard and humiliated. Today, Amelia was someone different, someone who had made the choice to stand up for herself. She called Jamila on her way out the door, and within 20 minutes, they were sitting in the car together, heading toward the store. The sky was overcast, a pale gray hue settling over the city, mirroring the unease in Amelia's chest. The small store sat on the corner, still unremarkable in appearance, but now it felt different, like it was a place where a battle was about to take place. Amelia couldn't help but notice the slight tremor in her hands as she held her phone, the camera app open and ready. Jamila, sitting next to her, shot her an encouraging smile. "Ready?" Jamila asked, her tone low but sure. Amelia nodded, though her stomach was tight. "Let's do this." They got out of the car and walked toward the entrance. The door jingled as they stepped inside, and the familiar scent of stale air and disinfectant filled Amelia's nose. The store was quiet, eerily so, with only a few customers milling around the aisles. But it wasn't the empty shelves or the long checkout line that made Amelia feel the weight of every step she took. It was the fact that she was standing there, ready to confront the woman who had humiliated her just hours ago. At the counter, the same young cashier stood, her back turned as she restocked the gum display. When she heard the door chime, she glanced over her shoulder, her eyes locking with Amelia's for a brief second. Amelia's heart skipped, but she stood her ground. "Hi," Amelia said, her voice steady, though it betrayed a slight edge of anger. "I'd like to check out these items." The cashier froze for a moment before turning to face them fully. She said nothing, just stared at Amelia for a long, uncomfortable beat. Her lips curled into a thin, tight line. "You," the cashier said, almost in disbelief. "You're back." Amelia didn't flinch. "Yes, I'm back, and I'm recording this, just so you know." The cashier's eyes narrowed, but she didn't say anything. Instead, she reached for the scanner, running the items across the counter, her movements slow and deliberate, as if to prove she was in control. Amelia's eyes flicked to the other customers, but they were all busy with their own shopping, none of them looking up. It was as if they were afraid to witness what was happening, as if being a bystander was their only choice. "Do you want me to call the manager?" the cashier finally asked, her voice almost dripping with disdain. Amelia's jaw clenched, but she nodded, refusing to let the fear creep in. "Yes, please. I'd like to speak with him." The cashier rolled her eyes but grabbed the store's phone and dialed. Amelia could hear the ringing, but felt distant, muffled by the rush of her heartbeat in her ears. She could see Jamila standing beside her, phone held low in her hand, capturing the exchange. Seconds later, a man in a blue apron appeared from the back room, his face hard as he looked from Amelia to the cashier and then back again. He was tall, with sharp features, and his eyes held a businesslike coldness, one that Amelia recognized from every time a white person tried to dismiss her experience. He took in the situation quickly and then turned to the cashier. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice flat. "This woman wants to make a scene," the cashier said, her tone coated with venom. "She's causing trouble, trying to say that we don't serve her kind. She came in yesterday." "I didn't say that," Amelia interrupted, her voice cutting through the air. "She said that to me, and it's not the first time. People have been talking about this store." The man's eyes flicked between them, and for a moment he seemed to hesitate, but only for a moment. He turned his gaze to Amelia, his lips twisting into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Look," he said, his voice low and dismissive. "This is a small store. We don't have time for drama. If you're unhappy with our service, you can take it up with corporate, but we don't tolerate disruptions here." Amelia's chest tightened, the coolness in his tone, the way he brushed off the reality of what had happened. It was the same thing she had heard 1,000 times before. Dismissal, denial, a refusal to acknowledge the truth of her experience. Her fingers tightened around the phone, and she glanced at Jamila, who gave her a quick nod. Amelia wasn't going to let this go. Not now, not after everything. "I've already contacted corporate," Amelia said, her voice growing louder, more confident. "And I've already spoken to the press. This isn't over. You can't just hide behind your counter and pretend it didn't happen." The man's expression faltered for a second, but he quickly recovered. "I'm asking you to leave. Now." For a moment, Amelia considered walking out, considering letting the whole thing go. But she didn't. She wasn't going to walk away this time. Not when she had the truth on her side. "I'm not leaving," she said firmly. "Not until someone acknowledges what's happening here." Silence fell over the store. The few customers who had been quietly browsing were now looking at Amelia, but no one spoke. The tension in the air was thick, suffocating, as if everyone was waiting for someone to make the next move. Then, without warning, the store manager's face twisted into a sneer, and he motioned for the cashier to call security. Get her out of here, he muttered. But Amelia stood firm, her feet planted on the ground. This time, she wasn't backing down. The air outside the store was thick with the remnants of a brewing storm. Clouds hanging low as if they shared Amelia's anger. She and Jamila stood on the sidewalk, the door to the store still swinging behind them, a silent reminder of everything that had just transpired. The weight of it all was almost suffocating. The manager hadn't even bothered to argue. He'd just turn and walk away, as if Amelia's presence had become a mere inconvenience, as if she wasn't worth the time. Did you get it? Amelia asked, her voice tight, her eyes still on the door. Jamila glanced at the screen of her phone, where the footage of the confrontation was saved. Got it. It's all here. Amelia ran a hand through her hair, the tension in her body refusing to dissipate. She felt the heat of the moment still crawling under her skin, and her pulse hammered in her ears. Everything inside her screamed to just walk away, to forget about it, to pretend it hadn't happened. But she knew she couldn't. She had seen it too many times before, the denial, the brush off, the way people pretended that racism wasn't real, that it wasn't happening, even as it burned through every exchange, every action. I can't believe he called security, Amelia muttered, her voice shaky, like I was some kind of criminal. Because that's how they treat us, Jamila said with a bitter edge to her voice. Like we don't belong, like our existence is a threat. But it's not just him. It's everything. It's the system, the silence from the customers, the way they all just... She paused, shaking her head. They just let it happen. Amelia's jaw clenched as the truth of Jamila's words hit her hard. She could feel the sting of that silence, of the invisible wall that surrounded her since she walked into the store. The people who had seen what was happening but hadn't said a word, hadn't even acknowledged her humanity. The weight of it pressed against her chest, as if she were suffocating in the absence of support. I don't know if I can keep doing this, Jamila, Amelia said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's so much. I feel like I'm fighting an army of ghosts, people who won't even speak up, who'd rather pretend it's not real. You're not alone in this, Jamila replied firmly. This isn't just about you, Amelia. This is bigger than just one store. This is about everyone who's been silenced, everyone who's had to fight just to be seen. This is their fight, too. Amelia stood there, her arms folded across her chest, her mind racing as Jamila's words settled into her. There was truth in them, undeniable truth. This wasn't just about her. It was about the whole system, about the weight of history that refused to be acknowledged. I'm not going to let them get away with it, Amelia said finally, her voice low, but filled with newfound determination. I'm not going to be silent. Not this time. Jamila gave her a small, proud smile. That's the spirit. Now, let's make sure people know what happened. Let's make sure they can't ignore this. Later that evening, Amelia sat at her kitchen table, her laptop open in front of her. The footage of her confrontation at the store was already uploaded, ready to go public. But as she stared at the screen, her fingers hovered over the keys. What if no one believed her? What if they said she was just stirring up trouble? Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from Jamila. Jamila, you're not alone. You can do this. Amelia's fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment longer, before a deep breath pushed her forward. She hit post. The video went live. The reaction was immediate. Comments poured in, some in support, others in disbelief. But one thing became clear. The store's actions had sparked something. People who had been silent, people who had felt the same sting, were finally speaking up. The small video of Amelia standing her ground had snowballed into a tidal wave of voices. And as the night wore on, the store was being bombarded with calls, messages, and tweets. The media began to pick up the story, with news outlets calling it yet another example of public racial discrimination. Amelia watched notifications flood in, her heart pounding. It was happening. People were listening. But as her phone buzzed incessantly, her stomach twisted into knots. For every supportive message, there was a hateful one. For every person telling her that she was brave, there were others accusing her of playing a race card, of looking for trouble where none existed. She could feel the weight of the world shifting against her, but she couldn't stop now. She wouldn't. Her phone buzzed again. This time, It was an email from the city's Human Rights Commission acknowledging her complaint about the store. The email was impersonal, boilerplate, but it was a step, a small one. They were investigating, and they'd be in touch. But Amelia wasn't done yet. She couldn't be. As the night deepened, the sense of determination grew stronger within her, like a fire that wouldn't be put out. The next step had already begun, and she wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not after everything. She glanced at the footage again, her heart swelling with the weight of what was happening. The echoes of anger, the pain, the frustration, the fear were growing louder. But it wasn't just her anger anymore. It was a collective voice of everyone who'd been silenced for too long. The world was listening, and it was only the beginning. Amelia barely slept the night the video went viral. She had kept refreshing her phone, watching the notifications roll in like waves crashing on the shore, each one more overwhelming than the last. By the time the sun came up, her story was everywhere. Local news stations had picked it up. Social media was ablaze with hashtags like #JusticeForAmelia and #RacismAt_store_name. Her phone rang incessantly, friends and strangers alike reaching out to share their support, their own experiences, or their disbelief. The comments, though, were what truly took over. Thousands of people had watched the video of her standing her ground in the store, of the cashier's blatant refusal to serve her, and the subsequent indifference from the store manager. Some comments were supportive. Many others were angry and filled with venom. Amelia didn't have time to process everything. She had always been a private person, the type who kept her head down, who didn't share much with the outside world. But now her story was being shared everywhere. It was no longer her story alone. It was about everyone who had been pushed to the sidelines, who had endured similar indignities in silence. Jamila had called that morning, her voice charged with excitement, but also concern. You see what's happening, right? This is bigger than just us. People are speaking up. Amelia sat at her kitchen table, the weight of the moment settling in. Her coffee had long gone cold, and the video was still playing on loop in the corner of her screen. She could feel the storm inside her building again, rising with each comment, each new person reaching out. It was a feeling of power and dread, all mixed together. The phone rang again. This time, it was a local reporter, a young woman named Claire from a news station who had been following the story online. "Hi, Amelia. This is Claire with Channel 5 News. We like to do a segment on your experience at Store Name. Is now a good time to talk?" Amelia's stomach tightened, but she didn't hesitate. "Yes, now's fine." They set up a time for a video interview later in the day. As Amelia hung up the phone, the thought of speaking to the press made her nervous. She had never been one for the spotlight, never imagined her life would be broadcasted on the news. But now, there was no turning back. She couldn't shrink away. Not now. The rest of the day passed in a blur of calls, messages, and frantic preparation. Jamila had been a rock, calming Amelia when her nerves threatened to overtake her. She reminded Amelia why she had to keep pushing forward, why her story had to be told. That afternoon, the interview went live. Amelia sat in front of the simple backdrop. The camera focused on her face. Claire stood off to the side, asking the questions that felt so sharp and real. Amelia's answers came quickly at first, each one fueled by a mix of anger and clarity. But as the interview continued, something inside her shifted. The anger turned into something else, something deeper. She wasn't just speaking for herself anymore. She was speaking for every person who had been turned away, every person who had been silenced in the face of injustice. The tears were hard to hold back, but she let them fall, not out of weakness, but because they were finally a release. She had been carrying so much for so long. By the time the interview was over, she was exhausted, but she felt something she hadn't in a long time: hope. The video aired that evening, and the reaction was swift. Thousands of people flooded social media with messages of support. Other Black women shared their own stories of being treated similarly at that very store. News outlets continued to cover the story. It was no longer just about Amelia. It was about a pattern of behavior that stretched beyond this one incident. But not everyone was on her side. The backlash came quickly. The store owner, Mr. Harris, issued a statement, his voice cool and rehearsed. "We regret the misunderstanding that occurred in our store. Our employees were following protocol, and the incident was unfortunate. We take pride in serving all customers equally and are investigating the matter internally. The statement felt like a slap in the face to Amelia. No apology, no acknowledgement of the racism she had experienced. Just an attempt to distance themselves from the truth. It was exactly what she had feared, a hollow response that refused to own up to the harm they'd caused. But the backlash didn't stop there. People who supported the store came out in droves, claiming that Amelia was just looking for attention, that she was twisting the truth, that she was a troublemaker trying to stir up division. Amelia braced herself for the flood of hate that came with those accusations, her phone lighting up with angry messages, some even threatening violence. Her heart dropped every time she saw one of those messages. The emotional toll was heavier than she had anticipated. Jamila was there as always, offering her a steady hand. Don't let them win. Amelia, they want you to shut up, to back down, but you're showing everyone the truth. Keep pushing. Amelia clenched her fists, the urge to retreat clawing at her. The words, the hate, they stung. But Jamila was right. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about something much bigger. By the end of the week, the store's reputation was in tatters. Mr. Harris was forced to issue another statement, this time acknowledging that his employees had made a mistake, and he vowed to undergo diversity training. The damage had already been done, though. Customers were protesting in front of the store. Social media campaigns were launched, urging people to boycott the business. Amelia felt a strange sense of vindication, mixed with the emotional toll of everything she had been through. The store had been exposed, but the fight wasn't over. The resistance had begun. Amelia barely slept that night, her phone buzzing with notifications that never seemed to stop. The backlash had begun. The supportive messages came in droves, but so did the hate. There were the angry comments on social media, dismissing her, calling her a liar, accusing her of seeking attention. People who had never spoken a word to her in their lives suddenly had something to say, and it felt like they were all shouting at her at once. It was like a punch to the gut every time she saw a new comment, each one more venomous than the last. Drama queen, making everything about race. This is why no one takes the Black Lives Matter movement seriously. Amelia tried to block them out, but the words cut deep. The messages came in waves, and every time she thought she had braced herself, something new hit her. Her mind started to spin, unable to focus on anything else. She had to keep reminding herself that this wasn't about her, that this was bigger. She sat at her kitchen table, her hands trembling slightly as she scrolled through the endless stream of comments. She didn't want to look, but it was like an itch she couldn't scratch. The more she read, the more she felt herself slipping under the weight of it. She could feel her emotions rising, a mix of anger and sadness surging within her, choking her throat. She had done the right thing. She knew it, but the world seemed to be telling her otherwise. Her body tightened with the pressure. How could people still be so blind? Her phone rang, breaking her train of thought. It was Jamila. Amelia. Jamila's voice was calm, but filled with steady concern. You okay? Amelia wiped at her eyes, the tears threatening to fall, but she refused to let them. Yeah, just reading all these messages. I don't know if I can take much more of this. It feels like it's everywhere. I know, Jamila replied, her tone firm. I'm seeing the same thing. But don't let them win. This is exactly what they want. They want you to feel like you're alone, like you're wrong for standing up. But you're not alone, and you're doing the right thing. People need to hear this. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this, Amelia admitted, her voice breaking slightly. The comments, the messages, the hate, I feel like it's just crushing me. Jamila's voice softened, but the strength in it remained. You're stronger than you think. You've already shown so much courage just by speaking up. People are listening, even if it doesn't feel like it right now. This is going to make a difference. Amelia, it already is. Amelia let out a shaky breath, trying to calm herself. I never expected it to be like this. I thought it would be enough to make a point, to stand up for myself and get some justice. But now it feels like I'm drowning. Jamila paused for a moment before speaking again, more gently now. The pain you're feeling right now is real, but it's not forever. It's a part of the process. You're going to face a lot of resistance, but that's because what you're doing is powerful. They don't want you to keep going because they know you can change things, but you can't stop. You can't give in. Amelia closed her eyes, resting her forehead on the table. Jamila's words were a lifeline, but the doubt still gnawed at her. Was it worth it? Was it worth all this pain and the people who were so determined to tear her down? Her mind kept flashing back to the store, to cashier's words, to the dismissive attitude of the store manager. She couldn't go back. She couldn't undo what had happened. I need a break, Amelia whispered. This is too much. You need to take care of yourself, too, Jamila agreed. Step back when you need to. Rest. But when you're ready, the fight's still here. You've already started something. Amelia, you can't stop now. Amelia sat silently for a long time after the call ended, the weight of it all pressing down on her. She had felt powerful before, but now the pressure felt like it might break her. The emotional toll was overwhelming. She was a target now. Her name was out there, her life scrutinized, and there was no way to take any of it back. But in the silence that followed, a thought began to settle in her mind, one she hadn't allowed herself to think before. The fight wasn't just hers anymore. People were paying attention. Her story had touched something in others, something that was far bigger than her own pain. The store was on the defensive now. People were rallying around her, speaking out about the same injustices they'd faced. The community was beginning to wake up. She needed to hold on to that. She needed to hold on to the bigger picture. She wasn't alone. Even though the hate was loud, the support was there too. The store had tried to crush her, to silence her, to turn her into a villain, but she was far from it. Amelia was more determined than ever. As the night fell, Amelia looked at the messages of support, people from all walks of life, all races, all backgrounds, who had come together. That was the strength she needed to carry forward. The storm wasn't over, but she wasn't afraid of it anymore. She had a voice, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that away. The storm didn't let up. In fact, it felt like it was only growing more intense. Amelia had tried to step back, to take a breather, but it was impossible. Every time she thought she could rest, another notification would pull her back into the fray. Every new tweet, every new comment, felt like a wave crashing into her, and though she was trying to keep her head above water, she could feel herself starting to sink. But there was a shift. Her complaint had made its way to the city's Human Rights Commission, and a formal investigation had been launched into the store. It felt like a small victory, but at least it was something. Amelia tried to focus on that, but the hate was still relentless. People were still mocking her on social media, calling her a liar, telling her she had fabricated the entire incident. Some even suggested that she was seeking fame. Each accusation hit like a punch. But it wasn't just strangers online. Her neighbors, people she had known for years, were starting to treat her differently. The whispers, the sideways glances, the awkward silences when she passed by. It was as though the whole town had decided she was the one causing trouble, the one who had gone too far. She had always kept a low profile in the community, staying out of the limelight. But now her name was out there, and it seemed like everyone had an opinion. One afternoon, as she returned from work, Amelia found a letter in her mailbox. It was from her landlord, and as soon as she opened it, the weight of its contents hit her. Dear Ms. Williams, this is to inform you that due to ongoing disturbances related to your recent media attention, we are regretfully notifying you of your eviction. This decision is final. The terms of your lease are no longer being honored. Sincerely, landlord's name. Her hands trembled as she read the letter. Her stomach twisted, a knot of anxiety forming as she sat on the floor of her apartment, staring at the paper in disbelief. They were kicking her out. It wasn't just the store, it was everything. The fallout had touched every part of her life, and now even her home was at risk. It was clear now. Standing up for herself had consequences that went far beyond what she had imagined. The eviction felt like the final blow, a personal attack on everything she had worked for. Her phone buzzed, and she saw Jamila's name flash on the screen. Amelia answered immediately, her voice shaking. They're evicting me. The landlord is kicking me out because of everything that's happened. What? Jamila's voice was filled with shock and outrage. "That's not right. You need to fight this." "I don't even know where to begin," Amelia whispered. "I feel like I'm losing everything. My job, my home, my reputation. It's all falling apart." Jamila was silent for a moment before she spoke again, her voice steady. "Amelia, you can't let them win. This is what they want. They want you to go away, to shrink back. But you can't. You have to keep fighting, not just for yourself, but for everyone who's been in your shoes. This isn't just about a store anymore. It's about showing the world that we won't be silenced. You can't let them take everything." Amelia's heart ached, her chest tight with the weight of it all. It was hard to breathe when everything felt so overwhelming. But Jamila's words grounded her. She wasn't alone. Even when it felt like the world was against her, she still had people who cared, people who understood. Jamila was right. She couldn't let them take everything. Not now. Not after everything she had already been through. The next day, Amelia went to the city's Human Rights Commission to follow up on her complaint. It wasn't much, but it was something. She needed to remind herself that her voice was still being heard, that her story wasn't over. The commission was reviewing the video evidence, along with her testimony, and the store was under investigation for discriminatory practices. Amelia wasn't sure what the outcome would be, but at least she knew that they were taking her complaint seriously. But even as she sat there, waiting for her turn to speak with someone from the commission, the weight of the world seemed to press down on her. The hate messages still came in, and her landlord's eviction letter was still fresh in her mind. It felt like a never-ending fight. The system wasn't built for people like her. It wasn't built to protect her. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from a local journalist who had been following the case. "Journalist, we're planning to run a follow-up story about the store's discriminatory practices. We want to include your perspective. Would you be willing to give an exclusive interview about your experience?" Amelia stared at the message, her breath caught in her throat. This could be the break she needed. She could expose the store, make sure they faced real consequences, and perhaps, just maybe, she could begin to rebuild everything she had lost. But even as the thought of speaking out again filled her with determination, another part of her trembled with fear. It would mean even more exposure, more backlash. It would mean even more people questioning her, doubting her, accusing her of stirring up trouble. Still, she couldn't back down. She had already made it this far. She couldn't let them take her voice, her power. With a deep breath, Amelia typed back a response. "Amelia, I'll do the interview." The days following the viral video felt like an endless storm for Amelia. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Her social media flooded with messages from all over the world, supporters, trolls, people asking her to tell her story, people calling her names. Every time she looked at her screen, it felt like the whole world was either on her side or against her. It was hard to breathe, hard to think. Each notification was a fresh wave, both lifting her and drowning her at the same time. She had expected the backlash. After all, standing up to systemic racism was never going to be easy, but she didn't anticipate how deep it would cut. The personal attack started small at first, whispers that turned into shouty, venomous messages. Drama queen, attention seeker, playing the race card. Words that for a moment she wished she could ignore. The hardest part, though, was the silence from her neighbors, the people she had seen every day for years. At first, it was subtle, a cold shoulder here, averted glances there. Then it became hard to miss. The woman from 2 doors down, who had once greeted her with a smile, now walked past without a word. The cashier at the coffee shop, who had always made small talk, was suddenly too busy to make eye contact. It wasn't just the strangers online, the faceless, angry people who had no stakes in her life. It was the people she lived with, the ones who saw her every day, who had witnessed the small injustices, but had never done anything about them. Now they were silent, too. Her chest tightened at the thought. That afternoon, Amelia was sitting at her kitchen table, her hands shaking slightly as she scrolled through her phone. Her lawyer had called earlier to give her an update about the case, telling her that the store would have to face a formal hearing. The store had already issued a statement trying to distance itself from the incident, claiming it was a misunderstanding. But they were backpedaling. It was all just a show. Amelia knew the truth. The video didn't lie. She had made her statement to press, but the fallout was beginning to feel like it was too much to carry. This battle, this fight for justice, was costing her more than she had imagined. Her phone buzzed again, and she saw that Jamila had texted. "Jamila, you okay?" Amelia stared at the screen for a moment, considering not replying. But she knew she couldn't shut Jamila out. Not now. Not when she had been her lifeline through this whole ordeal. "Amelia, trying to be, but I feel like it's all falling apart. My landlord sending me an eviction notice." Her fingers hovered over the keys for a moment before she hit send. She didn't want to burden Jamila with this, but she knew she couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. "Jamila, what do you mean? They can't do that, right?" Amelia let out a bitter laugh. "Can't is a funny word these days." She paused, then added, "I feel like everything's crumbling around me. I didn't know this was going to get so personal. Jamila, it's not just a store. It's everything now. It's like I'm being erased." She set her phone down and rubbed her eyes, trying to push back the tears that threatened to come. She wasn't the type to cry, especially not in front of anyone, but right now it felt like the pressure was too much. It wasn't just a legal fight. It wasn't just the hate she was getting. It was a feeling of being utterly alone in a world that had turned its back on her. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. "Jamila, Amelia, this is exactly what they want. They want you to feel like you're on your own. They want you to feel like you're fighting a losing battle. But you've already won so much. You exposed them. You showed people the truth. This is bigger than just you." Amelia let the word settle in. Jamila was right. She had exposed the truth, but there was still so much more to be done. People were watching. And it wasn't just about the store anymore. It was about a system that had allowed this behavior to go unchecked for far too long. She had started something, and as hard as it was, she couldn't back down now. Amelia's phone buzzed again, this time a call from the news station. She took a deep breath before answering, tried to steady her nerves. "Hi, this is Amelia Williams. I'm returning your call." "Ms. Williams, this is Claire from Channel 5 News. We've been following your case, and we'd love to do an exclusive interview with you about the store incident. We think your story can really make an impact." Amelia paused, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. The last thing she wanted was more attention. But deep down, she knew that this was a moment. She had a platform now, a chance to reach more people, to keep the fight alive. "I'm in," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves. The interview was set for the next day. Amelia tried to prepare herself for it, but no amount of rehearsing in front of a mirror could have prepared her for the flood of emotions that hit her as soon as the camera was rolling. Claire, the reporter, asked her questions about what had happened in the store, about the response in the community, about the racism she had faced. Amelia's voice wavered as she spoke, but she didn't hold back. She spoke about the store, about Mr. Harris, about the cashier. But more than that, she spoke about the system that had allowed this to happen, that had forced people like her to keep quiet for so long. As she spoke, she could feel the weight of everything she had been through pressing down on her. But she also felt something else, something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt like her voice mattered. She felt like the world was finally hearing her, really hearing her. The interview aired later that evening, and the response was immediate. News outlets picked up the story, and people began to rally behind her. The video of the store incident had gone viral, but this interview added something even more powerful. Her voice. It wasn't just a footage. It was her speaking out against the injustice, showing the world the toll it had taken on her. But even as the support poured in, the hate didn't stop. The comments still came. The accusations still stung. She had expected it, but it didn't make it any easier. Still, Amelia kept moving forward. She couldn't stop now. Not when people were finally listening. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. The aftermath of the lawsuit felt like a heavy fog settling over Tyler's life. The court's decision to hold Axiom Tech accountable for its treatment of him was a victory, but it came with a price. McAllister was gone. The company had apologized publicly, and the media buzzed with stories of workplace discrimination and corporate corruption. But Tyler's sense of triumph was overshadowed by the silence that followed the storm. He had lost his job, the position that had been his stepping stone, the place where he had invested countless hours of his life, was gone. Axiom Tech had offered him a severance package, a generous payout to move forward, but it felt hollow, like they were trying to buy his silence. The last few months had taken everything from him, his career, his mental peace, and the belief that corporate America would ever truly change. But as he sat in his small apartment, looking out at the city that had once seemed full of opportunity, Tyler realized that he wasn't defeated. He had exposed a system that didn't want to be exposed. He had made a difference, not just for himself, but for every person who had been overlooked, dismissed, or silenced because of the color of their skin. Still, the emotional cost weighed heavily on him. The constant stress, the sleepless nights, the endless battles. It had all taken a toll. Tyler felt disconnected from the person he used to be, as though part of him had been broken in the process. The victories didn't feel as sweet as he thought they would. The joy of seeing McAllister gone didn't fill the hole in his heart left by the loss of his job. Tyler spent his days reflecting on what had happened. The press had moved on to the next big story, and the noise surrounding the case had died down. But the scars remained. He no longer saw the world through the same lens. He couldn't ignore the institutional biases, the deep-rooted inequalities that had shaped his journey. And while the legal battle was over, the fight for true equality, the fight for justice, was far from finished. One afternoon, as Tyler sat scrolling through job listings, he received a call from Amanda. "Tyler, I got something you need to hear," she said, her voice serious. "We've been talking to some investors, and there's interest in funding a project that focuses on diversity and inclusion in the tech industry. We want you to be a part of it." Tyler's heart skipped a beat. A new opportunity? After everything he'd been through, it felt like a dream, like something out of reach. But Amanda continued. "This isn't just any project. It's a chance to shape the future. We're talking about creating real change, not just lip service. We want to build a platform that empowers marginalized voices in the industry and forces companies to be accountable for their actions." For a moment, Tyler said nothing. The silence between them stretched long, as if he were searching for the right words, for the right answer. But deep down, he knew there was only one thing left for him to do. "I'm in," he said finally. "This is what I've been fighting for all along." The next few months were a whirlwind of meetings, planning, and strategy. The project was ambitious, and the team behind it was determined to make an impact. They were building something from the ground up, something that would change the way companies view diversity and inclusion, not just as a checkbox on a form, but as a central part of their mission and values. Tyler threw himself into work, the fire that had been burning in him reignited by this new purpose. He no longer felt like a victim. He was an advocate, a voice for change, and this was where he could make the most difference. The project was already gaining traction in the tech community, and Tyler could feel the momentum building. But even as he embraced this new chapter, Tyler knew that the scars would never fully heal. The trauma of the lawsuit, the way he had been treated by those he had trusted, it lingered. There were days when the weight of it all felt unbearable, when the isolation crept in again and the doubts resurfaced. Would he ever fully recover from the emotional toll of it all? Would he ever find peace? The answer, Tyler realized, wasn't a simple one. Healing wasn't linear. It wasn't about forgetting what had happened or pretending it hadn't affected him. It was about finding a way to keep moving forward, to keep fighting, even when the road ahead was uncertain. He still thought about the people at Axiom Tech, the ones who had stood by him and the ones who had turned their backs. He wondered if, in the end, they would learn anything from this. Would the company change? Or would it just continue its cycle of corporate indifference, as so many others had before it? But for Tyler, the most important thing was that he was no longer invisible. He had made sure that the world saw him, saw the truth, and understood the cost of turning a blind eye. He had sacrificed his job, his security, and his peace of mind, but in return, he had gained something far more valuable: his voice, his dignity, his purpose, and that he realized was worth more than any job or paycheck. As Tyler walked out of the office that evening, looking up at the city skyline, he felt a sense of hope, a quiet, steady hope that maybe, just maybe, the world was starting to change. And with that, he was ready to keep fighting for it. The final moments of the trial were a blur for Amelia. The verdict had been handed down swiftly, as if the courtroom itself was breathing a collective sigh of relief. The store had been found guilty of discrimination, and the judge had ordered them to pay a substantial fine, as well as mandated diversity training for their staff. Amelia sat there, her hands trembling slightly, her eyes focused on the papers in front of her. For a moment, she felt the faintest flicker of relief, a small, almost imperceptible shift in the air. But it wasn't enough to wipe away the exhaustion that clung to her like a second skin. Victory, she whispered to herself. But was it really? The wind felt hollow as she thought about the cost. The public had rallied behind her. News outlets carried her story for days. People tweeted, shared, and showed up in support. But behind the applause and cheers, there was a different reality that Amelia couldn't escape. Her phone, once filled with messages of encouragement, was now filled with a new kind of anger. It wasn't just the trolls and the anonymous voices anymore. It was the people she had known for years, the people who used to wave at her on the street, the neighbors who had once smiled and exchanged pleasantries. She had lost them. Her eviction notice had been finalized. The landlord's letter had been blunt, stating that the community disruption was the reason for her eviction. They weren't going to tolerate the negativity surrounding the media attention. It didn't matter that Amelia had been forced to stand up for herself. In their eyes, she was the problem. She had disrupted the peace. Jamila had been a constant presence, her voice steady, guiding Amelia through the emotional roller coaster that was now her life. But even Jamila could see how worn out Amelia was. "You've done something incredible, Amelia," Jamila had said one night after watching the news coverage. "But this is costing you more than you ever thought. Don't let them take everything. You're strong, but you have to take care of yourself too." Amelia didn't have the heart to tell Jamila the truth, how she was scared. Scared that everything she had fought for, everything she had endured, was leading her down a path of isolation. The constant strain of being in the spotlight, the wave of hatred and the loss of her home. How could she keep going when it felt like the world was slowly closing on her? As the days passed, she found herself at the center of conversations she didn't want to have. People in her building whispered behind her back. Some colleagues at work had distanced themselves, uncomfortable with the controversy she had stirred. She had become a symbol, not just for racial injustice, but for something much larger and, to some, much more dangerous: resistance. Resistance meant chaos. It meant upheaval. And for some, that wasn't something they could bear. Amelia stood in front of the mirror late one night, her reflection staring back at her, tired eyes heavy with a weariness that went deeper than sleep. The victory was hers, but it didn't feel like one. She thought of the neighbors who refused to speak to her, of the family who had questioned why she hadn't just let it go, of the strangers on social media who accused her of looking for trouble. The bitter taste of their words lingered in her mouth, and for the first time in months, she felt herself questioning everything she had done. But then she thought of the people who had supported her, the people who had sent her messages of encouragement, the ones who said they were standing with her, even if they were quiet, even if they couldn't always speak out, the ones who had been through their own struggles, who understood what it meant to fight not just for yourself, but for everyone who felt invisible. She had seen the faces of other people of color at the protests, at the rallies, in the comment sections, sharing their own stories, echoing her pain. And in those moments, she realized that this wasn't just about her. It wasn't just about one store, one cashier, one incident. It was about a system that had failed too many people for too long. And while she might have felt isolated now, she knew that her fight had been worth it. Amelia looked down at the papers on her desk, document from the trial, evidence of the victory she had won. She smiled weakly, a sense of pride filling her. No matter what the world thought of her, she knew the truth, and the truth had a power that no one could take away. But there was something else, something important. The fight didn't end with the store's downfall. The fight was bigger than that. It was systemic, it was long-lasting, and it was about showing up, and Amelia knew she had to keep showing up. The next day, she walked out of her apartment for what she thought would be the last time. A moving van waited outside, ready to take the last of her belongings. As she stood on the sidewalk, her heart heavy with both loss and a strange sense of purpose, she took a deep breath. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from Jamila. "Jamila, are you okay?" Amelia smiled to herself. She typed a quick response. "Amelia, I'm okay. We're okay. I'm not giving up." She hit send, knowing that her words weren't just for Jamila. They were for herself too. Amelia wasn't giving up. Not now. Not ever.